You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. We are taking a detour this week as I tackled productivity from another angle. I also have several events that are fast approaching and for a while longer still targeting that book deadline. Then, in the spirit of catching up on content, I'll surface the highlights from 2 articles that I read this week. Let's dive in. Starting us off, in a world where we can build anything with likely some AI coding tool help, what should we be building? What's important to build? What are people interested in seeing and learning about? I've been feeling a bit stuck for a while, or at least making some progress in certain areas before feeling like I ran into a wall. And someone recommended a strategy day, which I started calling my brain sabbatical. In academia, sabbaticals are typically a break from the everyday and intense teaching of classes that instructors often do, and they'll go away and focus on intense study or research for different projects. Focus really heavily in one specific area for research or project work. And that's really how I saw this taking form in my own work format. Now, I did have some rules that I set aside for myself. First of all, no messages, no emails, no meetings, no other tasks that were related to work, etc., for some set period of time. Mine, at least this round, was a whole work day, but you could set a half a day, you could set a couple of hours aside, you could set a weekend retreat aside, however you want to formulate that, probably is fine. But setting some kind of boundary for just deep focus, freewheeling time. What I ended up doing is trying to figure out what are the challenges or the topics that interest me and expand my knowledge, as well as what are people interested in, what are they needing to learn, what skills are relevant in the current industry and market, and how do I go about providing content. In my case, I was looking to build some conference abstract proposals and figure out what I should go about learning in order to prove back this content as conference abstracts to help others along the way as well. On the actual day of my brain sabbatical, I did some ideation on a walk. So I took a walk around my neighborhood in the morning. It wasn't a terribly long walk. I had maybe 1 or 2 general conceptual ideas of things that I might want to start brainstorming a bit or pursue a little bit more. And when I took that walk, I just started working through my head on different perspectives. Hey, I'm a Java developer. If I'm going to a conference and if I'm this type of developer, what am I looking to get out of a session? What am I interested in learning? What are the challenges that I'm facing? What am I struggling with? And then I came back to my desk after the walk. I researched, I worked through those ideas to build out those topics and put together several what I think are some really good abstracts for upcoming conferences and events going into the end of this year and early next year. I am very excited to submit them to the CFPs for different conferences and see which ones might resonate with audiences and which ones might need a little bit more adjustment and tweaking to get the topic matter just right, or maybe some need to be retired and that's not of interest to people. Putting these out there and seeing where they end up, I'm really excited about doing that. Now, I am also working on building some project things, and based on the abstract brainstorming that I did today, I have some really cool projects that I hope to build out very soon after the book is complete, of course, which is coming up. But I will keep you posted on the details for the projects that I'm building, the things that I learn along the way through that, and then, of course, all the content that should come out as I put together these presentations for the next several months. I do have some upcoming events as well. I have an intro to AI workshop that is coming up on September 3rd. I will leave the link for that. So that's next week, actually. And then I'm also attending Graph Summit New York City. So this is a Neo4j hosted event. That's on September 17th. And then I'm doing a Northeast US meetup tour. So I have a stop in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. I have a stop in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then I'm stopping in Richmond, Virginia. And those dates are September 21st through 23rd. I will also leave links to those events as well. If you're in any of those areas or interested in those, feel free to check those out. I would love to see you there, and feel free to pepper me with questions and provide some more ideas for things I could explore or challenges that you're dealing with. All right, now I have two articles that I was able to work through this week, and they're somewhat related, actually, or at least I think they tackle the same problem in two similar ways. The first one is called Domain Knowledge is the Leverage by Besher Kayali Reinholdson. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And this one is talking about things that make coding easier to work with for humans also seem to be helping agents. Things like tests, domain clarity, modularity, and some other things as well. And if you think about this like your career moving from more introductory to more senior and heavier responsibility roles, we tend to start focusing more in on the high level and the system design aspects and less on the minutia of coding syntax or maybe detail efficiency, structuring and naming variables a certain way, etc. The author talks about this shift toward specs, so spec-driven development, if you will. And while no one wants hundreds of pages, tons of pages of requirements, documentation to have to read or try to understand, you need to use specs as technical decisions and documenting and reasoning through those decisions. Why and how and when you decided something should go a certain way or be structured a certain way. So specs should be very clear decision-making outlining of here's what we want, here's why we decided to use this approach. One of my favorite parts of this article is that nobody really has an end-all be-all answer for this. We're all testing things out and trying things and experimenting. The tools change very consistently. Something that worked for us a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, now doesn't work in this current age. We're all figuring things out and things are changing so quickly. Now, the insights that matter are coming from running these small iterative experiments over and over and over to validate whether this is working for us in this certain situation with this technology stack, etc. And not necessarily taking any one companies or developers or spokespersons or even AI coding tools perspective and their word for it. We're having to evaluate on our own. Well, does this actually solve my problem? Let me try to implement this. Let me try using this tool. Let me see if the results are as good as this other person is seeing. Another favorite part of this is that tests are mattering more than ever. When you have a AI coding tool that's generating code for you, you have to be able to check that it actually did the right thing. And the article says it seems like 25 years of people pushing test-driven development was good preparation for what's coming. I thought this was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, kind of funny. Some of these practices, things like test-driven design, things like domain-driven design, things like that are actually becoming incredibly important, especially in this age of AI. Overall, the article talks about different shifts in the approach to development. We're now looking at things like design, decisions, and domain, which have always been important, but these are especially becoming a focus right now. And this is shifting how we spend our time as developers as well. We're now verifying things, we're testing and we're reviewing much more than what we used to in the pre-AI days. The other article, which follows a similar trajectory here, is called Coding is Solved, Software is Not, by Gao. The main thesis of at least the first section is if implementation is becoming abundant, in other words, if syntax can be written at the drop of a hat with an AI coding tool, why does building software take so much time and effort? Now, this idea of coding is solved that the author kind of intersperses throughout the article is a really bold statement, but the author says it's also incomplete. And basically what it comes down to is that writing code has stopped being the slowest part of building software. Used to, that would be the longest pole in the tent, right? That would be the thing that took the longest, was taking the requirements and turning it into code and making sure that code functioned appropriately. Coding does not equal software development. And we're just coming to this epiphany, right? That makes sense. Coding is not the entirety of software development. Now, coding is still very important, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. And we're seeing this in an extreme form in this AI coding tool era. AI tools are managing the syntax version of that, the coding piece that used to take so much longer for us to do manually. And now it's either allowing or forcing us to take more time in other steps of that software development process. Here's kind of my take on it. Previously, we as developers only had time to specialize in one thing. I'm focusing on this programming language, or I'm focusing on infrastructure, or I'm focusing on requirements building, or I'm focusing on operations, or whatever it happens to be, one specific area of expertise inside software development. But now the article says after code exists, someone has to prove that that change belongs in the system, ship it safely, and keep owning the consequences. So now we're focusing more heavily on, well, does the coding syntax actually match the requirements? Can we verify that the code is working as it says it should be working? I really liked one of the diagrams that was in this article that showed kind of this messy intent of here's what I want the application to do. But this is in the minds of the business folks that want an application that does this, that, and the other thing. And then that intent that's very messy and all over the place gets formulated into a spec, which then becomes code, which then goes into a review step, which then gets shipped and deployed. No longer are we asking, can we actually build the spec that's being written? Now we are focusing heavily and spending a lot more time on, did we build the right thing in the right way? Did we build an application that solved the business problem to begin with? Now, that doesn't mean that these issues, these questions were never a problem before. It's just that the coding piece of that process was the one that took the longest, was the hardest to align. And therefore, we spent the most time in that area. We spent the most expertise. We spent the most learning brain cycles in that particular part of the puzzle. But now that AI coding tools are kind of handling that piece for us, we're realizing that, things that humans were automatically doing in that coding process, things like verifying the requirements, testing and iterating with proof of concepts, now we're having to spend a lot more time in those other areas because the coding has now been handed off to something else. Now, can AI own the coding step entirely? The article says not yet, and I would agree here. A generated test suite could be large and, as the article says, mostly confirm the implementation that the agent already chose. This is confirmation bias. If you have the agent say, hey, does the test suite validate and verify the requirements for the application, then it's already going to be biased, right? That would be like having the developer who wrote the code test and code review it as well. That's not going to be an impartial opinion on that. You need an external resource on that to verify the code. That's why typically your developers that wrote the code wouldn't typically be the same ones doing the code reviews. You have somebody else do that piece. Same way that's happening in this AI coding workflow, the software development workflow with AI as a piece of that. In the author's own experience with integrating AI into the workflow, the bottleneck has shifted. It's no longer that coding piece. It's now moved over. And for them, the author says there are 4 problems that keep coming back: context, specs, verification, and human checkpoints. The author's thoughts on this are that context needs to be chosen on purpose. More does not always equal better. That's something that I've mentioned in some of my content, my presentations as well. More context does not always equal better context. You have to refine and drill down into what are the key and most important pieces of context that I need to provide. Then the next thing is specs that stay with the work. A human with a very vague task likely will go back and clarify or construct in such a way that it's flexible to be able to shift easily. AI sometimes charges ahead very incorrectly. And so we have to keep the specifications alongside that work as we move through the process so that we make sure things stay on target. The next step is evidence that reviewers can trust. Reviewers need to know that the test was built correctly for that particular task or to solve that particular problem or calculation. And then finally, checkpoints where judgment matters. There are certain moments that require human judgment, and we need to have human on the loop type of pieces to insert those gates where we need to, but of course, maybe not at every point. I thought both of these articles hinted at very similar things. We're starting to move and shift the focus of software development in different ways. And it's always interesting and challenging to make these changes and to learn as we go. But it's a process that I think will reap benefits in the long run. Sometimes to move forward, you have to step back. It's a fine balance between progress and coasting. But the brain sabbatical this week was just what I needed to ideate and power forward with a plan. Then I had 2 articles in my browser tabs that I read covering AI coding and some skills to improve the results. Thanks for listening and happy coding.